Codex CLI patterns that actually work are boring. Inspect, patch one file, test, commit, repeat. That is the answer. The thesis is simple, and I've tested it enough to stop pretending otherwise. The best Codex CLI patterns are small, diff-first loops that constrain scope, preserve context, and force verifiable output every turn. If you want prompt theater, use a chat UI. If you want code that survives contact with a real repo, keep Codex on a short leash. That framing matters because the search intent around Codex CLI patterns is messy. Some people want a beginner guide, some want Linux workflow, some want editing patterns for existing code. The answer for all of them is the same process with different scope. Theo-style teardowns usually stop at features. I care more about terminal-first constraints and diffs because features do not pass code review. Diffs do. Before touching anything, I want a clean branch, a reproducible test command, and a repo small enough that a bad patch does not spray across 12 files. If I cannot run the tests locally, I do not trust the agent. And yes, this applies on Linux especially, because terminal workflows are the point here. The repeatable process is not ask better. It is start from a clean branch, capture the baseline, then let Codex operate inside a narrow lane. Here's the first receipt. Baseline test output before any generated change. If your tests already fail, Codex will happily optimize for confusion. That is not intelligence. That is autocomplete with ambition. Pattern 1 is inspect only. For beginners, this is the most useful Codex CLI pattern for daily coding because it keeps control of the codebase in your hands. I start by asking for a summary of the failing path, the relevant function, and the likely edit points, with no write step yet. For a Codex CLI patterns guide, this is the part people skip, then they act shocked when the tool edits the wrong layer. You want Codex CLI to read the local code and tell you what it thinks is happening. Then you verify that against the file yourself. Indie Dev Dan talks about the big three: context, prompt, model. In terminal workflows, context is the whole fight. If the context is sloppy, every later patch is just cleaner-looking nonsense. I saved the session transcript for this successful inspect pass. That receipt matters because later, when a patch goes wrong, I can compare what context the agent had versus what I assumed it had. Codex CLI patterns beginners should really mean keep a trail. Pattern 2 is the best pattern for editing existing code, single file patching. Not fix the app, not refactor auth. One file, one intent, one diff. I ask for the smallest change that resolves the failing case in the target file. Then I review the patch before I trust anything else. This is the core answer to Codex CLI patterns how to use and Codex CLI patterns code. You use it by shrinking the blast radius until the output is reviewable in under a minute. Here is the non-negotiable receipt. Terminal output showing a Codex CLI run against a single file and the resulting git diff. If the diff touches unrelated imports, renames symbols I did not ask for, or rewrites formatting across the file, I reject it. I would not hand Codex CLI a vague full app prompt and trust the first generated patch. I'd reject that in code review, and I'd reject it from an agent too. Then I rerun the same test command. This answers, which Codex CLI pattern works best for editing existing code? It's this one. Smallest patch that turns one known failure into one known pass. The tests before and after are the proof, not the agent's explanation. After that passes, I commit immediately. Inspect gets a commit. Patch gets a commit. Test repair gets a commit. Rollback gets a commit or a reset point. This is the second required receipt. A git commit hash for each pattern demo. Inspect, patch, test, and rollback. Real process beats memory every time. Pattern 3 is the daily repair loop. This is where Codex CLI patterns and processes becomes useful instead of decorative. I feed Codex one failing test or one lint error class at a time, review the diff, rerun the same command, and either commit or revert. That loop is what makes Codex CLI viable in actual repos. Great for tight terminal loops, bad as an unsupervised architect. That's my ranked take. For small, local edits, I pick Codex CLI over Cursor, because Cursor's UI convenience often hides the exact diff and receipt trail. For broad reasoning across a lot of files, I'd reach for Claude Code, but only carefully, because long context makes it easier to over-delegate. For Linux, the repeatable workflow is not mystical. Put the commands in shell history or a script. Use one terminal pane for codecs, one for tests, one for diff review. Save the transcript to a file if your version supports that, or capture the session output yourself. The point of Codex CLI patterns for Linux is reproducibility. I want a command log, a diff, and a commit trail I can audit later. And here's where this breaks. I have a failed run transcript saved too. In this one, Codex inferred the wrong call path from stale test names, proposed a patch in the wrong helper, and would have created green-looking churn with zero value. This is why I stop the moment the agent starts arguing with the tests, touching multiple files without permission, or explaining away a failing baseline. When should you stop using Codex CLI and take over manually? Exactly there. If the model is now exploring, you should be editing. Rollback is its own pattern, and beginners should use it more. If a patch passes one test but expands the diff or introduces uncertainty, revert to the last known good commit and restate the task more narrowly. That is not failure. That is normal software development with fewer delusions. My rule is simple. If I can't explain the diff in one sentence, the scope is too large. If the agent needs more than a narrow file target and a concrete failing signal, I'm already outside the safe zone. Codex CLI is useful because it is constrained by the terminal. Keep it that way. So the practical guide is this. Use inspect only first. Use single file patching for existing code. Use a test-driven repair loop for daily work. Commit every successful step. Save at least one good transcript and one bad transcript. Roll back aggressively. My ranking is straightforward. Codex CLI over Cursor for disciplined local edits, because the terminal makes the diff unavoidable. Claude Code over both for large context analysis, but only when you are ready to police delegation. That covers the useful daily patterns, the beginner control model, the best editing pattern, the Linux workflow, and the stop conditions. Small scope. Verifiable diff. Repeatable process. That is the whole playbook. Brief recap. The best Codex CLI patterns are inspect, patch one file, test, commit, and rollback when the diff stops making sense. I would not trust vague repo-wide prompts, and I would not accept generated patches without tests and commit receipts. Receipts in the description. If you want more terminal-first workflows that hold up in real repos, watch the next one.